Now, since it's the month of Halloween, the spookiest time of the year, we thought about what we could possibly do to make this bonus episode a little bit more in the vein of the horror. And unfortunately, Frasier doesn't have that many ties to horror.
No.
There are very, very few. I did have a look into it to see what kind of films the actors were in. The closest connection after what we're going to talk about, I think, was the episode of The X-Files that Dan Butler was in.
Yeah.
I think, or Silence of the Lambs, he's in that as well. Dan Butler's probably got the
Silence of the Lambs,
the closest relation to horror.
He was in an episode of Supernatural as well.
Yeah.
So he's probably closest. But yeah, there's not been like Kelsey Grammer didn't do any horror movies.
I was surprised. All the B movies and stuff he's done recently.
I know.
I was
come
amazed.
On. He did Money Plane. I'm surprised that he didn't do anything that was like trying to be scary.
Yeah, perhaps the unlikeliest of all of them was David Hyde Pierce.
Yeah.
But for those of you that are not yet aware, back in 2010, I believe, he starred in a small independent film called The Perfect Host. It's a psychological drama, horror kind of film, but it's probably the closest we've got to like a spooky movie starring one of the main cast. And for the first time ever, Ewan watched it this week.
I did. I had not seen it. I had heard of it because a while ago when Frasier was on Netflix, you can, when you're browsing stuff on Netflix, you can like click the actors and it shows you other stuff they've been in. And I remember clicking it and this movie came up and I was like, that's weird. And I looked it up on IMDb and they were like, oh, David Hyde Pierce is the villain in a horror movie. And I was like, that's very weird. Why would they do that? And since then, that must have been about 10 years ago. Since then, I've had this in my head of like, this movie's just going to be strange. I thought it was going to be bad. And I'm really interested to hear whether you think it's bad or not. I don't think it's bad at all. It's really weird.
It's super cheesy. A lot of the comedy, it's a very like sort of black comedy horror. It does have sort of deliberately humorous elements in it.
Yeah.
It's very on the nose in what it's trying to do as well. But it's not bad. I wouldn't say it's bad. It's not the best film ever.
Yeah.
But as far as like independent horror goes, it's pretty watchable.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of great like twists and turns throughout.
I had no idea where they were going at any point. There were like 5 different points during this film where it turned completely in what it was doing. And I was just thrown every single time. It's one of those ones where like you kind of... Yeah, like it opens and you're like building up to the first twist. And I think the first twist is kind of obvious. Or like, I say kind of obvious. It's like the premise of the film, quite obviously, is that David Hyde Pierce is going to be the villain. Or that like there's more to him than you think. His character, Warwick, is like, he's rich, he's living alone in this like very fancy house. And the main character, or the hero, I guess, if you'd really even call him a hero, John...
Hero's a stretch.
Shows up, and it's the whole thing that it's like, oh, maybe there's clearly more to him than you think, and he's more threatening than you think. He's not just some random dude. And it's building up to that first twist. And I was like, I wonder how long they're going to go before they reveal it, because it's really obvious, and like they can't expect you to keep going for that long. And it's maybe like 20 minutes, half an hour into the film.
Yeah, it's about 20 minutes in.
And then from there, it's just like, that's so much weirder than you think it's going to be. And then they're just like constantly twisting even further and further the whole way through.
I don't know what kind of marketing it had at the time.
Probably
I wasn't
very low.
super aware of it at the time. But in terms of keeping it on the down low, like keeping these twists hidden, you'd probably struggle if you watched a trailer or anything.
Yeah.
There's very little that you could do without giving something away in the later plot. You'd have to kind of go in completely blind, which I think you mostly did.
Yeah.
Which I think, I'm super excited to see like just your thought process.
I was making notes throughout it, so I have my descent into madness written out in this Google Docs.
Well, let's go through it a little bit.
Yeah.
We don't want to make this a super long episode, but we'll go through it and we'll have a bit of fun and see what everyone thinks.
Yeah.
So the film starts with John, the main character, played by Clayne Crawford.
Clayne Crawford. My first note is, what kind of name is Clayne? Which I think is a fair question.
A plain name.
Plain name, Clayne.
He's actually very good in it. I think he's actually does a really good job.
For someone that I hadn't heard of before, and I don't know if he's been in anything particularly.
To be perfectly honest, I've not seen him in anything else, so I don't know. But he is very good in it. And he's injured, sort of limping through the, I think, suburbs of California.
I think it's supposed to be in LA. Yeah.
LA, yeah. Those kind of houses, the sort of bungalow style, but very extravagant through the what do you call them? Like the back streets.
Yeah.
All the pools and everything. He's crawling through and he tries to get into a woman's house and she won't let him in. He claims that he's been mugged and lost his wallet and everything. And the next house he tries, he kind of goes through the letters in the letterbox and then goes up to the front door and tries to let David Hyde Pierce, who plays Warwick, tries to convince him to let him in. He claims that he's a friend of Julia, who he found in one of the postcards
from Julia, yeah.
And Warwick is sort of like, oh, that's how do you know her? And kind of keeps up the conversation. And you can tell that he's lying, but he's very good at it, and he kind of improvises at every section.
Yeah.
And eventually Warwick concedes and lets him in to phone. He says he's lost his airport baggage or something, so lets him in and tries to get him the phone to help him out and stuff.
Yeah.
And he keeps asking him questions and everything about Julia.
This is the point where I was really impressed by the film, to be honest, because I was like, this is genuinely very tense.
Yeah.
It like actually, in the same way that any other like proper big budget horror movie would do, is really gripping, because you're like, he could get found out at any second.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, why don't I give Julia a call? And he's like, pretends that he's bought into his lie, but also goes to call Julia, and you're like, if she answers the phone, something the hell's gonna break loose. And you get the idea that Warwick is like unhinged. He's like clearly a little bit unstable, but like we don't really know what's going on.
I was kind of rewatching it, right? Because this is, I think, the third time I've watched it over the years. Rewatching it again, I kind of was more of the impression that he knew that John was lying right from the start and was just playing with him. Like when he picks up the phone to call Julie, he's like, right, this is the point where I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to see how far I can push this guy and see if he admits it or whatever. And it's very, as you say, it's super tense watching it. You're like, oh my God, how is this going to go? Who's who? What's happening? And he's got guests coming over as well.
Yes.
We've got to mention, that's a key point, is he's hosting a dinner party. So he's kind of wanting to get it all sorted and get John out of the way before the guests appear. And eventually John admits.
John is listening to the radio.
Oh, he's very,
The radio comes on, and he hears this news report saying that they're on the lookout for a man called John Taylor, who has been ID'd by a clerk at the bank, a bank clerk, and is like wanted for armed robbery of however much money. It was something like $300,000, $500,000, some amount of money. And at that point, he's like trying to listen, and Warwick keeps talking, and he snaps and he swears at him. And you see Warwick is just like, oh, you shouldn't have done that.
Yeah,
shouldn't have been rude. And that's when it like turns, and John is like, right, now this is a hostage situation.
So he's in control at that point.
Drops all the pretense, threatens him, he has a knife, and he's like, right, you're going to sit down, you're going to shut up, you're going to call your friends and tell them not to come around. And it's like, at this point, it's like it sort of goes like, oh, maybe they're just doing like the classic home invasion horror.
Yeah.
Tropes. Like he's just, it reminded me quite a lot, especially with like the dark comedy elements in the home invasion. Sort of reminded me of Funny Games, the Michael Haneke film.
I know of it. I've not seen it, but
kind of like that. And I was like, oh, this is weird. Like I didn't expect that, because I thought that Warwick is like the villain. Like
Yeah.
I was surprised that it went in that direction.
And it totally like you completely lower your guard.
Yeah.
You're like, right, okay, John is in control. He's got the knife. He's the one threatening Warwick. This is how it's going to go, and this is the film.
Yeah.
And then we get maybe another few minutes in, Warwick sort of John sitting smoking and taking control of the situation,
Drinking all of his wine.
drinking the wine, and then he suddenly starts to feel a bit dizzy and collapses, and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Warwick comes, and it's the line that he says when he comes over. He picks up the bottle of wine and he kind of swats on the floor and goes, "It's a cheeky little drop, isn't it?" And it's like such a weird line. And they've got steel drums playing in the soundtrack over it.
Yeah.
Like only at this point in the film, and I don't know why they did that. It totally perplexed me, but it was so funny.
But it's such a perfect, like, David Hyde Pierce is perfect for something like that. Like, he absolutely nails the sort of line between sincerity and comedy in a scenario like this.
Yeah.
He's absolutely perfect in it. It's so good. So as the night goes on, it kind of time jumps an hour or so, and we're cut back to John on the couch, and he's all tied up, and we cut over to Warwick, and all his dinner guests are over, and they're all sitting and having dinner, and we're like, oh, they're okay with this hostage tied up in the corner of the room, and then it cuts back to John, and then cuts back to the table, and it's just Warwick sitting by himself,
talking to
himself and eating food off everyone's plate, and you're like, okay,
yeah,
what?
And this is the first big twist, is that they don't just go like, oh, he's like a kind of Hannibal Lecter type of lunatic, where he's like throwing dinner parties and everyone kind of thinks he's just this charismatic guy, but under the surface, he's like a psychopath. He's actually just nuts. Yeah. And is like, has made up all of these people, you know, all of his dinner guests aren't real. He's like obsessed. This is where the name obviously comes from. He's obsessed with them like having a good time, even though they're not real. Yeah. Yeah.
It's wild.
It is.
And then that's kind of, for the rest of the film, it's just, you just don't know what to expect. Yeah. From that point on, you're like, right, okay, well, I just, all bets are off. Who knows?
The rug's been pulled and you're totally on your ass. Yeah, and we've had also, at this point, we've had a cutaway to a couple of detectives. I don't know if you noticed this about the two detectives, or one of the two detectives at least. So there's one that is a little bit more prominent who winds up being in the film until the end. But the younger one, who only has a few lines and appears in it a little bit less often, I don't know if you recognize the actor that played him.
Can't say I did.
It's the actor that plays Nikos from The Trouble with Greeks. Frasier and Niles' cousin.
Beware of Greeks.
Beware of Greeks. Sorry, not The Trouble with Greeks.
Yeah. Is it really?
Yeah. It's Nikos. Which I just thought was so funny. I'm like, oh man, I can't believe they've got another Frasier actor.
I didn't know. He wasn't on screen long enough to make notice, to be honest.
I recognized him when I saw him. And he's like, obviously older because it's been, about 15 years since he'd been in. And his hair's sort of greyed. So he just looks totally different. But yeah, I thought it was really funny.
But we've got these two cops as well, who were kind of cutting between them and the party, and we're kind of cutting between perspectives as well. We've got Warwick's perspective, where the guests are all having a party, the music's blaring, and Warwick's being this great host, and he's flirting with people, and he's going around topping up drinks and everything, and then it very suddenly cuts to like John's point of view, and it's just silent, and it's just Warwick sort of running around the apartment pretending to like shout over the music. Yeah, it's surreal.
It is so weird, and I loved it. So John's tied up at the table, and they kind of start talking about like, oh well, the night's still young, the party's going to be kicking off later on, whatever. And at that point, Warwick comes through with this scrapbook that's got Polaroid photos of other people that he has clearly held hostage at some point, and John is at this point like, oh God, I've f***ed the wrong guy.
Yeah.
What have I done? And then the party kicks off properly as we're then getting to this. John still sitting on the couch, tied up. And this is probably my favorite part of the whole film. David Hyde Pierce smokes a doob. He smokes some of that ganja,
Some of the kush.
and then does a choreographed dance number to Rolls Royce's car wash.
Yep.
It's incredible.
He sure does.
It's great.
That is a thing he does.
Yeah, I loved it. And again, they cut, like, during the dance number, during this dance scene, they still cut back and forth between what Warwick thinks is happening and what is actually happening. So you've got, like, sometimes he's standing on the table and you've got all these other people around him and they're doing all the dance moves like in sync and it's perfect, and then it cuts back to John's perspective and it's just David Hyde Pierce on the
table,
on the dining table in this otherwise empty room, just doing a little dance, just doing some disco dancing, and it's great. It's so good.
It's insane. It's like, just when you think that the film couldn't get any weirder, it pulls out a dance number.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, yeah, cool. Whatever, man. So we got, that's kind of it. That's most of the film, most of the remainder of the film is this kind of back and forth. John trying to convince Warwick to let him go, tell him that he needs help, and he's trying all different things. They do he drinks a cocktail and they do a conga line, and then he gets stuck outside. One of the neighbors spots him, so he puts on, like, Warwick has to quickly put on like a Halloween mask and pretend that he's drunk. He's just a friend that's drunk. So there's all these sort of tense moments where you're like, oh, is he going to get found out? Oh, is it going to... Oh, no. And then he gets let away and you're like, oh my God, this is wild.
It's,
and then we get a couple of really great moments of David Hyde Pierce where he just snaps, like mid-sentence. He's chatting to John and he's doing his whole, like, sort of perfect host routine, and then he stopped and he just, like, smacks John right across the face. It's wild. It's so, like, unexpected. Even within a film that's full of unexpected, you're still surprised at all these points. And we get eventually we have John challenges him to a game of chess. Warwick's playing with himself. Well,
Warwick's playing with himself.
He's playing with
He's
someone
playing chess with himself
in his head, but he's playing both people. And John challenges him, and then we have like a cutaway flashback to where he's teaching his girlfriend to play chess, and you're like, oh, he knows what he's doing.
He's good at chess,
and
that's why he's such a good bank robber. Apparently, even though he got shot in the foot,
that kind of
got caught.
Yeah, these kind of bits, man. As long as you don't think about it too hard.
Oh yeah, this is definitely one of those movies where it's like, especially the last maybe 20 minutes. Nothing makes any sense anymore, and it properly goes off the rails, and everything's really inconsistent, and like you kind of just have to sit and enjoy it.
Well, this is the start of that when John wins the chess game for his freedom. Warwick, for some reason, acknowledges that and appreciates that and lets him go. He unties him and he's like, "Yeah, fair game, on you go." But then as he leaves, he starts to, like, berate him, and say what a crap person he is, and just totally lay into him. At which point John pulls one of the sort of the decorative swords off the wall and stabs Warwick. And you're like, oh my God, no, that's it. It's game over.
It's over.
But it's not, because it's a fake sword.
This is the end of the film, but there's still 25 minutes left. What's happening?
Oh my God. And then, when he wakes up in the bathtub and David Hyde Pierce is having sex with one of his guests. In his head over the bathroom sink. But I noticed at this scene, they never cut away to Warwick's point of view. So it's just John watching him pretend to have sex.
With someone on, like, leaning on the sink.
It's uncomfortable, to say the least.
It is.
But yeah, and that's the beginning of the end. When we cut to it next, John, we get a shot of John, like, in amongst the garbage outside with his throat cut.
So
you're like, well,
that's it.
game over. And then he wakes up
Yeah.
and peels the fake scar off his neck. It's like prosthetics.
And he realizes that all of the various cuts that he's got across his forehead and on his arms and wherever, they're all like latex.
Yeah.
Presumably if they were put on when he was drugged,
Yeah.
he just assumed that they were real. And it's only now that he's woken up and realized that they're not.
Yeah. Warwick revealed to be a professional makeup artist on the side. And then...
And so that's big twist in the finale number 1.
One of what, like 3?
I guess, yeah.
So then we get the police, the cop from earlier, turning up in the street.
Yeah.
And knocking on the door, asking about... Or no, what is it? He knocks on the door, and then the scene pans around, and it's Warwick's door.
You see the little like video doorbell thing that Warwick has, and you see like, oh, it's the detective outside, and Warwick's kind of like putting on his dressing gown. You're like, oh god, he's been found out. That the police have showed up at his door, and he answers the door, and the detective says, "Oh, I'm sorry to bother you so early in the morning, Lieutenant." And at that point, I was like, what? No. It's like, yeah, absolutely losing my mind at that one.
It just, so it just turns out the whole time he was a cop himself.
Yep.
And he's just, doing this little fun hostage situation on the side.
I guess just for a laugh. I mean, a lot of what he's... maybe he's not really injuring him that badly because it's all fake. He clearly didn't kill him and he just let him go at the end of the day. But a lot of what he did is still very illegal.
And just, But what makes it even better
illegal.
is the cop comes and asks him advice about John and what to do about him. And you're like, oh my god.
Yeah.
So we see the two of them go off. Warwick goes and gets dressed, and they go and try and hunt down John. Meanwhile, he figures out that his girlfriend, whom he was doing the robbery for, there's a wee like sort of subplot where his girlfriend is presumably
she's sick with an unnamed disease.
Yeah.
She just kind of hunches over and goes, ooh, every so often.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh no, you need $300,000 for
money.
medicine. And she's the bank teller who helped him pull off the robbery and then immediately sold him out to the police so she could take the money herself and run.
Yeah. So he kind of tracks her down. He manages to figure out which rental company and which car she's taken and finds her in the parking lot. Goes in, confronts her, steals the car and the money with very little effort, tells her to go do one, and then drives off.
Yep.
But as he drives off, we see the cops pull into the same parking lot, and Warwick, being one of them, stops John at the gate, and we have this super like tense standoff.
Yeah.
Right at the this is the end of the movie. This is where John's gonna get caught and put in jail, or this is where Warwick's gonna get found out by the other cops, and it's all gonna come to a head. And then it doesn't. Warwick just takes a bunch of the money, not all of it.
Not all of it.
He leaves some of it.
Yeah.
And then lets him drive off.
Just lets him leave.
And that's it. You're like, okay.
Yeah.
And then cut to, what is it, a couple of months later.
Yeah.
I think it's implied. And the other cop gets a letter in the mail with a Polaroid in it.
Yep.
From Warwick's party.
Where did he get the Polaroid from?
Don't question it. don't question it. Just let it go.
Yeah.
But he gets the Polaroid with Warwick and John both on the couch, like smiling and hugging and pretending to be at a party.
Yeah.
And he confronts Warwick about it, and you're like, oh, how do you know this? Oh, it's photoshopped. Like, it's a Polaroid. I'm like, yeah, well, how else would he do it? It's like, it's not really a convincing argument, is it?
It's not.
And then it ends with, what is it he says? It's something on the lines of, would you like to come round for dinner?
Yeah.
In true David Hyde Pierce mannerisms. It's excellent.
This movie's actually great.
I
loved it.
Yeah.
This is now firmly planted in my heart as one of those just like absolutely terrible movies that I just love so much. Because it's just completely ridiculous. Like I said, it's terrible. It's not. It's surprisingly well made for the fact that I can't remember how much it was, but it had a really low budget, which was presumably mostly spent on David Hyde Pierce.
Quite probably, yeah.
The rest of it was probably spent on getting Car Wash for the soundtrack.
Yeah.
And it was shot in like 17 days. Probably just like in the director's house.
Honestly, probably.
Or like they rented the house or something.
It looks very
like,
livable.
It wasn't like a set. It was
Yeah.
clearly just someone's house, and that is where they film almost all of it. You know? Yeah. So surprisingly good in that sense, but also totally nuts and so weird.
Just so unexpected at every single turn.
Yeah.
But I love the portrayal of Warwick. I love David Hyde Pierce's performance. I love how you can see Niles ingrained in his personality.
Yep.
Even when he's playing this total psychopath, you can feel it. You can feel that's where his heart is.
Yeah.
And I really love that. It's not even like typecast per se. It's just he played the role for 11 years.
Yeah.
It must be hard to kind of shake that attitude off. And then when you're asked to come and do a role that's quite similar, very high class, you know, he likes his wine and his dinner and he's throwing a party and all that. It must be so easy to kind of slip back into the similar role.
He does bring a lot of Niles to the character.
Yeah.
In the best way.
Yeah.
In the best way.
We need to find, or maybe hope for in the future, a counterpart for each of the main Frasier cast.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, not John Mahoney. I don't know what kind of horror-esque films he might have done back in the day.
I don't know.
But the rest of them, do you think maybe we'll get a horror B-movie that we can compare with?
So, is Warwick the Waluigi? Is Warwick Niles' Waluigi? Is that what this is?
Yeah. I guess.
And then that would mean that Darius Grouch, the third from Money Plane, is Frasier's Wario.
I mean, it's not a perfect analogy, but
yeah,
I'll let it slide.
Yep.
No, it's a good film. It's worth watching.
It is definitely worth
Definitely
watching.
recommend it.
Although now I'd have to say that I recommend you watch it before listening to this.
I suppose.
Because it's one of those films you really should. Hopefully you've already seen it if you're listening to this.
Yeah, we should maybe put a disclaimer at the start.
We'll put a disclaimer at the start.
Full of spoilers.
Yeah.
Watch it first.
Yeah.
It's something you have to experience for yourself. Even with the spoilers.
Yeah.
You have to see it to believe it.
Because you probably don't believe us.
We could have made
About
this
half
whole
of
thing
this
up.
we absolutely could have done.
And then he was the villain, and then he was actually the good guy, and then he was
a policeman.
He was a policeman. He was actually a psychopath. Like,
yeah.
Just a whole movie of yes and, wasn't it?
It was like it was improv. Man,
what a great film.
absolute classic.